Welcome to the Unitarian Church in Colorado, where we think religious questions are important, but we want to work out our own answers, where we gather to share ideas and support one another. We gather this hour as people of faith, having sorrows and joys and needs and gifts. We like to speak in hope as a sign of our quest for truth and meaning, and in celebration of the life we share together. Could we join please in our opening hymn number 347, Gather with the Spirit. we join in unison affirmation? It's in the order of the service. Love is the doctrine of the church. The presence of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus we come to each other. Any announcements?
The Course in Miracles continues every Friday at 11 o'clock on Zoom, and we're pleased to let you know that our speaker for today is a regular participant now in this, and we value his insights and contributions. So you're also welcome as well. We have importance if you want, now as well. You got it.
I got a text from Deborah this morning. She wanted me to share. I'll read exactly what she said. Please pass my regards to those in church. Hope you are all well. She's probably on Zoom.
Any other announcements?
I'll just give you one insight. Today, music kind of inspired our previous talk about small effort building to something larger. In musical terms, that would be a cue for an invention, where you start with a small bit of melody and you go on. So that's what music will be today.
Some of you may remember David Pohl, P-O-H-L, excuse me. He was the district executive back when we had a district. He always looked to me like an accountant. He was a little guy. He was kind of gray. He had gray hair and kind of pale skin and wore gray suits. But still waters run deep. And he wrote an invocation that I think is just wonderful. It's in the back of our hymnal. We come to this time in this place to rediscover the wondrous gift of free religious community, to renew our faith in the holiness, goodness, and beauty of life, to reaffirm the way of the open mind and the full heart, to rekindle the flame of memory and hope, and to reclaim the vision of an earth made fair with all her people one. Could we please be joined in a spirit of prayer or meditation? May those of us who come here today nagged by a problem find calmness before long and a beginning of clarity. May those of us who feel that we put out and put out and put out until we feel we have nothing left, today find a few moments of quiet where we can begin for a change to take in and to be restored. May those of us who have recently been stung by criticism discover that the hurt only goes so deep, and may we find inside us, beyond the reach of the hurt, the courage to face the part that was true, and the tranquility to let go the part that was not. May those of us who come here today numbed by a loss discover that while the emptiness may not go away, neither will life's urge to renew itself, and that already healing is underway. May this be a place where we are accepted for who we are, a place where we receive the extraordinary gift that people who are continually getting to know us better and better like us anyway. May we be touched today by something somebody says, perhaps, or by something we see, or by a thought that comes to us, or by a sound, or by the expression on someone's face. God, we are grateful for all the things that make us happy, including, of course, the big things that we plan for and work for. But we're grateful also for all those little things that bring happiness unexpectedly while we were thinking of something else. And we're grateful that so often, when we dread the worst, what actually happens turns out to be much less than the worst. And we are grateful that so often, when we don't get what we want, what we do get turns out to sustain us. And now let us be silent together to create an opportunity for prayer or meditation. The reading is from an article that was in Atlantic Monthly a long time ago, the early 80s, called Broken Windows. A stable neighborhood where people care for their homes, mind each other's children, frown confidently on unwanted intruders. A neighborhood like that can change in a few years or even a few months into an inhospitable and frightening jungle. A house is abandoned. Weeds grow up. A window is smashed. Adults stop scolding rowdy children. The children become more rowdy. Families move out. Single adults move in. Teenagers gather in front of the corner store. The owner asks them to move. They refuse. There are fights. Litter accumulates. People start drinking in front of the grocery store. In time, someone who's had too much to drink slumps to the sidewalk and is allowed to sleep it off. Panhandlers approach pedestrians. At this point, it is not inevitable that serious crime will flourish or violent attacks will occur. But many residents will think that crime, especially violent crime, is on the rise, and they'll modify their behavior accordingly. They'll walk the streets less often. And when on the streets, they'll stay apart from other people. They won't meet people's eyes. They won't say hello. They'll hurry on thinking, don't get involved. But the people whose lives derive meaning and satisfaction from local attachments and local people, for them, the neighborhood will cease to exist except for a few reliable friends whom they will arrange to meet by appointment. Such an area is vulnerable to criminal invasion. Though it is not inevitable, it is more likely that here, rather than in places where people are confident that they can regulate public behavior by informal controls, it's more likely that here, drugs will change hands, prostitutes will solicit, cars will be stripped, that muggings will occur. Sometimes people will call the police. A patrol car will arrive. There'll be an occasional arrest. But the crime and disorder continues. It is not abated. Citizens will complain to the police chief, but he or she will explain that the department is low on personnel and that the courts don't punish petty or first-time offenders. To the residents, the police who arrive are either ineffective or uncaring. Soon the citizens stop calling the police because, quote, they can't do anything. That sounded Bach-like.
Except it was Arkansas Traveler. Arkansas Traveler,
Bach.
played as an invention, played as a pop invention.
Turkey and the straw.
I'd like to begin by reading just one more paragraph from that article. Social psychologists and police officers agree that if a window in a building is broken and is left unrepaired, soon all the rest of the windows will be broken. This is true of nice neighborhoods as well as rundown neighborhoods. Window breaking does not necessarily occur on a large scale because some areas are inhabited by determined window breakers, whereas others are populated by window lovers. Rather, one unrepaired broken window is a signal that no one cares. And so breaking more windows costs nothing. I saw something like this happen. The summer I lived in New York City. I lived on West 102nd Street between Broadway and Amsterdam Avenue. Not a tough neighborhood, but well, maybe a little bit of a tough neighborhood. A little bit of a tough neighborhood. And the city swept the streets twice a week on Monday and Thursday. So Monday morning, it was illegal to park on the odd-numbered side of the street. And between, I think, 9 and 11, and the street sweepers would come then. And it was illegal to park on the even-numbered side of the street between, I think, 2 and 4, and the street sweepers came back and got the other side. And this was true on Thursday also. One Tuesday morning, I was walking to the subway, and there was a car that had a ticket on it because it was on the even-numbered side of the street, but the previous afternoon, it had not moved. So it got a ticket. And then Friday morning, on the way to the subway, the same car was still there with 2 tickets. So it hadn't moved the previous afternoon either, and probably hadn't moved for quite some time. Saturday, there was no change. Sunday, there was no change. Monday, there was no change. Tuesday morning, it had 3 tickets and no wheels. And no wheels. It was up on concrete blocks. And then the next day, the hood was open and the battery was gone, and some other easy to dismantle, valuable engine parts were missing. And the next day, someone had smashed the side window and gotten in and taken the radio and the fancy knob on the end of the gear shift and who knows what else. And a couple of days later, the seats were gone. And by Sunday, someone had set it on fire. And then for 2 weeks, it sat, a burned out hulk, up on concrete blocks until the city finally took it away. It was that 3rd ticket. That was like the broken window. It said, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Social phenomena have something called a tipping point. If you imagine an old-fashioned scale with 2 pans, like the one on the cover of the Order of Service, or I imagine one with a vertical pole and a bar like this and 2 pans hanging. If, let's say, the scale is this way, if you put small amounts like pebbles in the upward pan, for a long time, nothing happens. But then, if you put 1 pebble in, everything shifts. Everything shifts. That last pebble went in right at the tipping point. So a little change had a big result. We speak of social problems as epidemics We talk about an epidemic of violent crime, of family breakups, of littering, of rude drivers, of drug use. In 1983, at the time that this article was published in the Atlantic, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta had some thinkers who asked the question, what if social problems really do behave like epidemics? What if social problems really do behave like epidemics? Here's an example. Suppose, this is an example about a hypothetical virus. This is nothing like COVID. This is a virus that makes you feel a little crummy for a day. And then it goes away. It disappears in 24 hours. It doesn't even prevent you from going to work or school. You just feel a little crummy. But you really do feel crummy. You notice it. And suppose this virus comes to Boston because 1,000 Canadians come to a convention, and all 1,000 of these Canadians have this virus. And suppose this virus has what they call a 2% propagation rate, meaning 2% of the people you come into contact with will catch it from you. Or in other words, 1 out of 50. 1 out of 50. If you come in contact with 50 people, 1 of them will catch the virus from you. And suppose, since I'm making all this up, suppose that the average Bostonian comes into contact with 50 people a day. Then on day 0, the day the Canadians arrive, the 1,000 Canadians have the virus and nobody else does. But they, like all the other Bostonians, because they're temporary Bostonians, they come into contact with 50 people, and other than their fellow Canadians. And so the next day, each of the Canadians has infected 1 other person. But the Canadians themselves are no longer sick. It's a 24-hour bug. So on day 1, the Canadians have recovered, but now there are 1,000 Bostonians who have the virus, each of whom comes in contact with 50 people, each of whom infects 1 of those 50 people. So each of the 1,000 infects 1 other person. So on day 2, the Canadians are okay. The first group of sick Bostonians are okay, but now there's a new group of Bostonians, 1,000 in number, who have the virus. And this situation is perfectly stable. But then suppose there's just a little change. The little change is it gets a little colder. So people spend more time indoors in close contact with other people, on subways and in stores and at school. And so now, instead of the virus, so now the average Bostonian comes in contact with 60 people instead of 50. That's the little change, from 50 people to 60. Well, then on day 0, 1,000 Bostonians have the virus, but on day 1, 1,200 have the virus. I'll spare you the math, but it comes out to 1,200. And on day 3, 1,728 have the virus. And on day 4, more than 2,000. And by Christmas, thousands and thousands and thousands of Bostonians have this virus. The tipping point was each Bostonian coming in contact with 50 people a day. As soon as you went beyond that, as soon as it went to 60 people, the epidemic took off. The situation changed. A little change caused a big result. It works the other way too. Big efforts can have small results. Suppose the health officials in Boston launch a big public health effort, and they place advertisements on the internet and on TV and in newspapers telling people to wash their hands and wear masks and keep young children home from school and blah, blah, blah. And because of this big public health effort, each 1,000 Bostonians no longer infect 1,200, but only 1,020. Only 1,020. Each 1,000 Bostonians infect only 1,020. The epidemic will continue anyway. That is, there'll be more and more people infected every day. The epidemic won't grow as quickly as it was, but it's still going to grow. It's still going to get worse. So it sounds like bad news if you talk about tipping points. A little change can have a big effect, and a lot of effort can have a very small result. And so you can feel if social problems really behave like epidemics, then what's the use? What's the use of playing by the rules? What's the use of picking up a gum wrapper on the sidewalk? What's the use of being polite? What's the use of playing fair? But it's not bad news. See, the converse works too. Suppose the health officials in Boston who've managed to reduce the number of new infections per 1,000 to 1020, suppose they continue their effort and even increase it and manage to get the number of new infections down to 960 per 1,000 sick the day before. If they do that, the epidemic will be down 25% in 6 days, down 50% in 2 weeks, and have virtually disappeared in 6 weeks. So it works the other way, too. I want to change the subject for a minute and talk about Bill Bratton. Some of you remember Bill Bratton. He was the #2 man in the Boston Police Department back in the 80s when all these discussions were going on. He became the head of the New York City Transit Police, and later the New York City Police Commissioner. And later he came back to Boston for a short time before retiring. He had read this article in the Atlantic. He had been reading articles that these people at the Centers for Disease Control had written. And he decided, when he was the head of the transit police, that he would try to fix broken windows. That would be his approach. That is, whenever graffiti appeared, it would be immediately washed away or painted over. Or turnstile jumpers, people jumping the turnstile on the subway to avoid paying, would be apprehended because someone would be there watching. When he became the New York Police Commissioner, he expanded the same approach, cracking down on littering and vandalism and public drinking and drug dealing, all these minor crimes. And in 4 years after becoming the New York City Police Commissioner, violent crime, felonies, murders, assaults were down 40%. 40%. Because he had sent the message that somebody cares. Somebody cares about everything. I think there are 3 morals we can take from this. One is, not only can things quickly get bad, things can quickly get better. A man named George Galster of the Urban Institute in Washington put it this way: you get nothing until you reach the tipping point, then you get boom. Or I'm reminded of a saying from England that I like: tomato ketchup in a bottle, none will come, then the lot'll, then the lot will, then it all comes. Social phenomena are like that. They may spread like contagions, but social health can spread like contagions too. Things like good citizenship, and civility and morality and kindness and caring. These things are contagious too. That's the first moral. Good things are contagious too. The second moral is to change the world, you don't have to change everybody. You don't have to change everybody. Getting the number of new infections per 1,000 down from 1,200 a day to 960 was enough to break the back of that hypothetical epidemic in Boston. You didn't need to get the number of new infections down to 0. It was enough to get it down to 960. To change the world, you don't have to change everybody. It's not necessarily a disaster if one of your coworkers is a cheat. It's not necessarily a disaster if one of your kids' friends or your grandkids' friends is no good. You don't have to cure everybody. And the third moral is we shouldn't be discouraged when our efforts seem to have no effect. Think of this. You put in a pebble, nothing happens. You put in a pebble, nothing happens. Another, nothing happens. And then, yes, one day if you put in one more, boom, the thing changes, but all of those pebbles were important. Every one of those pebbles brought the tipping point closer. There's just one that gets credit for the big change, but every one of them was contributing equally. We should keep on being honest and teaching our children and grandchildren to be honest. We should keep on donating our time or money in public spirited ways. It's not a waste of time. You're bringing the tipping point closer. Every effort matters. When you care, it helps. When you care, it helps. I'd like to end with quoting one of my favorite readings. This is at the back of our hymnal too. This is by Edward Hale, who was a Unitarian minister in Worcester originally and then in Boston back in the 19th century. And early in the 20th century, he was the chaplain of the United States Senate. And he said this: I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And I will not let the fact that I cannot do everything discourage me from doing the something that I can do. Amen. And now for the support of this church and its work, the morning offering will be gratefully received and I hope freely given. We're not passing the plate now during pandemic times. We're leaving the plate on the table and coming up individually and putting something in. We come to our time of sharing joys and concerns. The principle is that a joy shared is multiplied and a concern or sorrow shared is divided.
Well, we have a really big joy that I think we've shared with a few of you, but I think some of you don't know about, we have a new grandson due in this month.
Oh,
October 18th, yeah, Hillary. And, he was born in London, so we're planning, a trip towards the end of the month to London. So, consequently, we're going to hide, for a little while, because we don't want to carry anything. So, yeah, big boy.
Yes,
Just wanted an update on last week, and we were live, and I said we had a situation, thanks to kids' generosity and others. The party who was stuck in Florida and came back in Bedford, and so that's good. Also want to add something to what you were saying. As a psychologist, I had a client who was a drug dealer in New Bedford. And we got him to a place where he was no longer a drug dealer, and now he's a positive force. But he had a girlfriend who was worse than him. And I can remember being sort of, I'll leave out the expletive, but I was pretty angry with her. And more than one time, I said, I'm going to call the cops on this lady. Something changed with her. And they're married, and she's now working for a social service agency.
Yeah.
And helping people just like her.
Yeah.
So you really reminded me today, Richard, of that famous Margaret Mead saying, never doubt that a small group of thought-committed citizens can change the world. It's the only thing that ever happens. Oh, and I also wanted to let you know, I'm sorry, I forgot to make the announcement that Claire Donaldson is joining us next week. We've met her only on Zoom, we get to meet her in person next week.
oh, sorry.
I have enjoyed, my greatest joy is being here at the Unitarian Church. At one time in my life, I didn't have anything or anyone in my life. I was never educated about religion, so I never really knew my right source. But I always had a spirituality part of me, something that was inside that I never let go. In the last, I'd say, 8 years since I've been to the Unitarian Church and then Reverend Dr. David Rankin, that it's taught me a lot about being who I am and who I like and who I enjoy, where I feel comfortable. And I feel comfortable amongst the Unitarian Church that no one is here to judge. I haven't heard or seen anyone that has made any kind of negative reaction towards myself. To other community areas where I help the homeless, and that's what I've been doing as an advocate, helping people fight addiction and homelessness, which I do too. But the more I give to other people and I see a smile on their face, it brings a lot of joy to me. And I think ever since I've been a Unitarian, I believe that I've been able to express and not worry about what someone might think. I give a pair of sneakers to somebody and I see a smile on their face, that their joy has just given me joy. Years ago, I would have never done that. I would have always thought of myself as being selfish. But I've learned so much things about giving and having that joy. I want you to take that away from me. It's in my soul, it's in my heart. And I feel so much joy. I feel comfortable every day when I wake up. And I think, out of all the places I've been, I feel
Just as an add-on, Donald was kind of shy about his heritage. His last name is Milky. And he may have read the New Testament across the name of Jesus of Nazareth, of the order of Melchizedek. Milky is a derivative of Melchizedek. This family is from Lebanon, Syria, where Melchizedek was king. We retain our notes.
Yes,
I have a question. You're a physicist. when the tipping point comes, does it actually reverse the scales or does it even?
Well,
Okay,
maybe there's one pebble that does this.
all right. All right.
But you don't stop that. Not that. That's right.
Anybody else? Yes.
We had enjoyed this week, our daughter Allison had had 3 unsuccessful back surgeries and has been unable to work, and she applied for disability from Social Security, and we waited months and months, not knowing anything, and she has no income, and it just causes depression and anxiety for her and us as well. And she did find out this week that she was approved for her disability, so the big relief for her mom. Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah.
Anyone else? We should remember that we have many things on our hearts that we haven't shared. Can we join in our closing hymn number 121, We'll Build a Lamp? like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, the good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. Amen.